the only way to start your day.
Pulmonologist. We'll ask Wajiro what that means later, among other consultants near your home. So, for families on Gong Road and its environs, we got you with the medical centers at the following locations. So, we're talking to folks at on Gong Road this morning, the Aga Khan University Hospital and its specialized clinics near you. Prestige Plaza, Valley Arcade Shopping Center, Bina Complex in Karen, T-Mall, and Gong Town. Visit any Aga Khan University Hospital Medical Center in your hood today or call 0730-018-011-888. I'll do that again, 0730-011-888. The Aga Khan University Hospital, world-class care here and now. Sawa? Remember that. And even as we do, let's look at the state of the economy. We're not just going to look at it, but we're probably going to interrogate it a little bit and find out a number of things. Raising the budget ceiling, debt strategy, and the IMF. Joining us in the hot seat of the Situation Room this morning is Irung'u Nyakera, former PS Planning. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
Very well, thank you, and happy to be here today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Karibu. I'm glad that we could look into some of these matters with you. Dennis has taken us to a different country this week.
Yes, Equatorial Guinea, a country that has had a president for 47 years. 1979.
How old are you, Dennis?
Who was born in 1979?
You know? So 1979. It's a country that is rich in oil deposits, but unfortunately, that is not helping the country because it's like the African story. It's being taken out and buying it back in a very expensive manner. Human rights in the country is something that does not exist, but that notwithstanding as well, it is a country, the only country in the continent that speaks Spanish. So they also speak French and Portuguese. So that has helped many citizens to operate globally, diplomatically, because they're able to speak different languages. But let's go to the proverb. When the roots are deep, there is no reason to fear wind. How would you interpret it?
It's about the foundation. If you have a strong foundation, then everything else will work out well. Yeah.
Well said, short and sweet.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Straight to the point.
Yes.
Yeah.
Why
This
cut
is going to be
corners?
a great conversation.
Well, all right. And then maybe we can get your opening, your views, Irung'u, about what you think the state of the economy is, what we can see, what we can feel. How would you look at Kenya's economy today, and what would you say its health status is if you were on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best?
I think I'd put it, the state of our economy at about 5.
Okay.
So it's not 0, it's not 1, and it's certainly not 8 or 10. And 5 because the state of the economy is actually how you feel it in your pocket. It's the perception is the reality. So if actually people are saying that there is no money, then there is no money. There are those few that have it, and the ones who have it are holding it because they don't want to spend it at this point. And then the majority are now having to suffer from that reality of that there's no money. And if you think of why there is no money, and yet the government is really collecting money, is what we always say, that Kenya does not have a revenue problem. Kenya has a spending and prioritization problem. For every 10 shillings that the government collects in ordinary revenue, 6 shillings goes into paying debt. So only 4 shillings is left for everything else.
Okay.
For your schools, for your hospitals, for your roads, everything else, only 4 shillings is left. So whether or not the government decides to raise the ceiling and collect and have more debt, because currently we're at about 12.4 trillion shillings in debt, as long as we do not have fiscal discipline on how we spend our money, on how we prioritize, on how we fight corruption, on how we treat those who plunder and waste our money, then it'll just be the same spiral, just continuous collections, and nothing, nowhere to show for it.
Our
Yes.
conversation is over. That is
We're
it.
done. We can shut it down.
Now we can shut it down.
Yeah.
One opening statement has closed it. What I would ask around this debt ceiling, because, and then if you don't mind, I'd like to link it to your tenure
Yes.
as a PS
Yes.
in planning,
Yes.
where you said that you overperformed
Yes.
and therefore you had to lose your job.
Yes.
and my question would then be, what's your advice to government? What are these drivers? Because, like you said, since in 2013-2015 period, Kenya's debt was 1.2 trillion. Now we are at 12.4 trillion. And this is the cost of the big four, better. These big political projects that are riddled with self-interest, but also the model that government has taken is to build big, borrow, and this seems to be an insatiable thing. So when you sat as PS of planning, what was the advice you were giving to government? And if it were you now advising government and parliament on this debt ceiling, what would you say in practical terms? Because we seem to be stuck in a debt cycle, needing to borrow to pay off. Yeah.
I think actually when I was in planning, one of the biggest the conflicts we had was with actually the office of the president, because I remember myself and the CS were in Mombasa working on the final budget, the policies for the 2017 to 2022 period. And that's when I was called and I was told that we have the big four pillars and we need to incorporate them into our plan. But then I asked, how do we have big four and that we are supposed to be on Vision 2030? Because our planning was actually anchored on Vision 2030 and not on the big four. The big four were new to us. And big four had been brought in by McKinsey. And they were not, so essentially, they had come and sold this agenda and this plan to the president and had made us move away from actually our planning.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest challenge even today in Kenya, where we are excited by new things and we forget that the growth trajectory is really based on consistency and discipline to a set plan and agenda. We have Vision 2030, we have Africa Agenda 2063, which are the two that were actually anchoring our budget, our planning process. So, you see, if you're already spending 60% of your collections on debt, then it means that there's really, you can't expect to have much growth. At least there won't be development spending. And of the 60% that you're spending on debt, like local debt is this year is going to be about 1.1 trillion. And the 1.1 trillion is before you even add the pending bills of 700 billion. So, and that's now, we've again moved, if you see the conversation with IMF, we've also moved away from concessional funding, debt for the foreign, to now more market-driven debt, which is a lot more expensive. So your Euro bonds, your different green bonds and all that, that's now no longer concessional. So it means that we'll continue to borrow at a much higher costs. So the question is, you see, even when you go to the bank yourself to borrow, it's always about what is that money going to do for you. If the money is going to generate a significant return for you, then there's no problem in borrowing. So nobody has an issue with borrowing. The question is, if you're going to borrow for consumption, if you're going to borrow for what goes into corruption, to fund corruption, if you're going to borrow to pay for more debt that you had taken before, so it doesn't make sense. So there has to be a real conversation on fiscal consolidation and fiscal discipline. How are we going to bring down the debt to the deficit from the current 5% to the intended 3%, 4% of GDP?
Right.
We talk talk about a very big budget like this year, now we've moved to about 4.7
trillion.
shillings in the budget. But of that, about 35% is borrowed. Yeah, only the KRA is expected to raise about 2.83 trillion. The rest, 1.7 trillion, is A&A and borrowing. So it's about 35% in borrowing. So are there things that we are borrowing for that we really don't need today? Because I keep saying Kenya will be there 100 years from today. Norway is still building roads today. They're still building ports. So we don't have to do everything today, but we have to create a great foundation for whatever capital we are getting to be able to generate value and revenue for us.
Nyakera, I want to look at three things that you've mentioned, right? That there was Vision 2030, there is still Vision 2030, which was a clear blueprint that Kenya would follow when it comes to sorting out if it's development, social services. It was clearly stipulated in Vision 2030. But then again, there is as well the African Vision, where is 2063, that Kenya is a signatory to, and that as well was together with the region and the entire continent on where Kenya was supposed to go. And all these things are anchored into statutes and laws that we must adhere to. Therefore, when it comes to Parliament, which is an oversight body that should ensure that our vision, what we signed up to, are upheld, Parliament is there to play its oversight role to ensure that is done. Is therefore Parliament, as part and parcel of government, the weakest link in ensuring that we follow the law, we follow our vision, and that we implement that which we have set?
I think if you think about Parliament, is what oversight do they provide? Because as soon as they're put in people's pocket, in the executive pocket, then they really isn't oversight. They're just waiting for whatever document is brought to them for them to say, look at the Safaricom, for example, diversity of government. It was just taken to Parliament, and within a few days, regardless of the price, regardless of whether or not, without questioning whether or not the government was going to get real value, there was no valuation report, and they just passed it, and yet there was even a court order stopping them from passing. But because the executive had said so, they went ahead to do it. So I don't think there's anything that I have seen coming from Parliament that actually tells me that Parliament is in control, or the Speaker is in control. It just says that the Parliament is an extension of the executive, and it shouldn't be. And that's why we, hopefully in the next election, we can be able to get parliamentarians who actually believe in Kenya and a better Kenya, and not necessarily just on their pockets. When you're talking about the Vision 2030 and Agenda 2063, they're different in that Vision 2030 is about Kenya itself.
Yes.
How do we grow? Who are we? What are our aspirations? And priority being Kenyans. Agenda 2063 is about connectivity of Africa. How do so the infrastructure? How do we move from Kenya to Mali? How do you? So I think priority for us actually should be Vision 2030 because that's where the capital allocation should come in first. The regional growth and the Africa agenda, I think should be secondary. Should come second. So if you have excess money, then you can be able to fund that. And that's why when I was in transport, the PS transport, of course, our key projects were two. One is the central, the Lapset corridor, which was to connect the East Africa through the Lamu corridor, so you connect Ethiopia, you connect South Sudan, you connect Uganda. And then we had also the SGR corridor, which again connects the entire of East Africa. And see, I keep saying it, and people keep saying that I was talking when we were talking about the SGR itself, the extension of SGR, because we went all the way to Naivasha.
Yes.
We were looking for funds, concluding the funding for the next phase, which was the Naivasha to Kisumu. And for me, I remember when I was chairing the PSs for the Northern Corridor, and I said that for us, the priority for us Kenya should actually be to reach Kisumu. And then at Kisumu, we build a port, because we already had the funding for the port. we had received about $140 million in funding, which was coming to almost 20 billion to put a modern port facility, which will create jobs, allow for the industrialization of the region. Actually, around the Xi'an area, the Chinese had taken over about 1,000 acres to put up industries and put up an industrial park, because I was saying that there is no point of us paying for the Kisumu to Malaba port, which was about $1.3 billion. Yet we are not. There is no money that the Kenya will get out of it. I was saying, over time, once we generate enough money through the port, then we can be able to do the same.
I'm curious,
So,
where did the $140 million then go? Because you just said that you had already received the money.
No, it was approved.
It was approved
we had
to
received
receive it
a
from
facility, a loan.
a loan.
From part of the SGR funding.
Did the money come
No, it
through?
didn't.
So it just
didn't.
remained
Yes.
in that.
Yes. It
But
was
more
to
to
come.
the point is that this plan to do the connectivity and
Yes.
the linkage was overridden by political
Yes.
political decision making that then also robbed Kisumu of this major investment.
I think it was not even a lot of political. I think it was the issue of the actualization of the phase 1 and phase 2. Because already the funders were looking at, we've given you money already. You've already built the rail to Nairobi. You're supposed to be doing about 48% of the capacity of the rail for you to be able to even break even.
Right.
And yet at that time we were doing about 16%. And that's why they did not at that point approve the funding. For now the Naivasha 2B, phase 2B, now Naivasha, Kisumu.
So we were unable to execute.
Yes, we were
This
unable
is
to execute.
The 40% overpricing of SGR and all notwithstanding. So we even after all of that, we were unable to execute.
We were unable to execute.
Okay.
And the land compensations and the law court.
The land compensation was done. It was just moving people or providing enough commercial reasons for people to move from using the road and the trucks to using the rail. Yeah, so because then everybody continued using the roads. So we had anticipated that with proper pricing, we should be able to move the trucks away from the roads.
From the road, yeah.
And that's why, and then we were also expected that we should also be able to put up the industrial park in Naivasha to be able to also have return cargo going to the coast from inland and potentially even to export, because then you lower the cost of logistics to we're looking at bringing it down to, from about 35% to 14%.
Those proposals suffered a lot of legitimacy questions.
Yes.
Because Naivasha was questioned. The inland port, of course, was contentious because of Mombasa, the impacts on the coast, Mombasa business. And these issues were not well canvassed. So it was viewed as a project to benefit the regime of the time.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. And then even transporters said the consultations were not clear. So legitimacy...
The consultations, I agree, because I'm the one who put together the first... kind of stakeholders, brought together the stakeholders for consultation to now even start looking at the pricing and the costing, because then we're looking at the port of destination when designating cargo from overseas, not to be Mombasa anymore, but to be Nairobi.
I look at these things and it seems as though there's a merry-go-round here of perpetuity where you know what's supposed to be done. There is a lack of appetite or desire to actually get it done, because a lot of these things are laced with political goodwill, or in some case the absence of it. I mean, because you can see, anybody can see, you don't even have to have any kind of additional education to understand what, for example, a port would do for a city. It's very clear. And we also know that economic development for any country cannot happen without the manufacturing angle. We know this. This is already clear. You don't have to be a planner. You don't have to be an economic expert to understand and we also see examples from across the globe how this has happened. That there's no country today that is economically sound or stable that does not have a manufacturing angle aspect. It doesn't exist anywhere. So now, knowing this, what really is the problem that stops then us? And I say us because it's not just Kenya.
Mm-hmm.
On the continent, we have the resources, we have the people, we have the technical know-how, but we're unable to bring these things together in concert to have it done. And we've been unable over time. Why?
Yeah, you know, you speak of manufacturing, and the Vision 2030 actually had put the target at about 15%. And I think about 3-4 years ago, we were at around 12%. Now we're at 7%. So it's declining. And you see, manufacturing is a key driver to GDP and growth, because the raw materials for manufacturing are coming mostly from our farms, meaning that actually that helps too. There's import substitution, so it helps in our currency itself, strengthening our currency, because then we are not importing finished products. Then, of course, for exports, then jobs creation, utilization of our utilities, if it's power, if it's whatever. So manufacturing actually, as you said, is a key driver to GDP and growth. But you see, unfortunately, the bureaucrats and the politicians make money from building and construction, not from implementing. Yeah. So they will always want a new road. Yeah. They will always want a new building. They will want a new railway, not to use it, but to make money at the construction and the building stage. And that's why we don't implement.
Wow. Okay, because look at the
do we
things.
deal with that?
Yeah.
You've actually, you're beautifully just targeting the heart of the problem. How do we deal with this inbuilt corruption incentive?
I think we have to incentivize performance and punish the corruption in the real sense. Because you see, the issue when we're talking about the railway, for example, just as an example, because manufacturing and all that is touched, when the target is 48% on utilization of the railway, but we are at 16%. And nobody talks about it. Yeah. And what does that mean? It means that instead of the railway paying for itself, there has to be money coming from the treasury to fund, because the 20 billion per year has to be paid for. It now has, you raise 2-3 billion from the railway, then the other 17 billion that should have gone to schools, should have gone to hospitals, should have gone to actually the elderly and the young people, to be small businesses, to paying pending bills, is diverted to pay for that loan. But it could actually have been collected if actually. So you sit there and you look at the person who's in charge, and the loss that they are to the economy is 17 billion, because it is money that we could easily have captured. But are they put to account? No, they're not put to account. And they will actually be at the front line in negotiating the new rail from Naivasha to Kisumu. So that, because that's where the new money is.
Irung'u, you talk about negotiating the new deal from Naivasha to Nakuru, because, like you've rightfully said, SGR from Mombasa had a clear plan on what it was supposed to do. And I remember at the time, even setting up the inland dry port in Naivasha, there was a plan around it. And I remember at the time, transporters were supposed to use the railway to Naivasha and then pick it up from there to the rest of the country. But there was politics that was played. And I remember that was played mostly in Mombasa by the current president, then deputy president. And remember the entire debacle that was there. But then again, that notwithstanding, even then the former government, what conversation did they have with the transporters per se to bring them up to speed on the vision of the railway, why it is important for us to go there to help pay for the same, so that these other services go to everybody, because this then brings forth conversation around public participation that did not happen as expected at the time. Correct me if I'm wrong. But then again, there is also politics that we play. Like you said, today, we're talking about going to Kisumu, right? But we're going to Kisumu because we want the new thing on land. Not because it will deliver, but because we want to be seen to be working and not implementing the original vision. Am I right? Am I wrong?
Yeah, you see, like, for example, the Kisumu. Without the Kisumu leg, the SGR does not make sense. It should have at least gotten all the way to Kisumu. But I think the biggest challenge is now seen as the politicization of it, is the politics. When we're talking of the Naivasha, while what people are not seeing was actually it was more about the land acquisition at around the Kedong Ranch, because there were people who had already positioned themselves to sell the 10,000 acres to government that the government needed. So it was always about the deals to be done. You see, for SGR to work, for the people who use it or expected to use it are business people. If I'm told that I'll be spending 50 shillings where I've been spending 70 shillings, it's a no-brainer. I'll do it. But the cost was higher. It's actually higher. And then the time is higher, because you'll get to ICD in Nairobi, and then it'll take you another 2-3 days to get clearance, and then you have the other last mile that again will cost you 35,000 shillings to move your cargo from there to there. So it did not change, didn't make sense, essentially. So it just has to make sense. And that's why bringing together the stakeholders, all of them, and everybody, and government is looking at it. You see, this is a long term. So you don't, and I was saying, we're not trying to make money in the 20 years that you're repaying this loan as government, because you'll be operating the rail beyond the 20 years.
Of course,
paying the
it'll
loan.
be longer than that.
Yes, we had already by then been operating the meter gauge for over 100 years, and it was still there. So I think it's more for government to sit with the stakeholders and not take a very hard stance. Because part of the reasons for the SGR was even to reduce the on-the-road carnage.
Indeed.
Even the congestion
on the roads.
On the roads. I was arguing that we are talking about dueling Mombasa Road because it's a new deal for about $3 billion. While we are not utilizing the SGR. If actually we can utilize the SGR and even give subsidies for people to use the SGR,
then
you'll have
need
less
to do
cargo on the road.
Sounds like a no-brainer, like you said. I'd like us to take a break at this point because, this seems like there are too many balls up in the air and perhaps not enough going right. So perhaps our conversation then shifts towards what needs to be done, because then it becomes a little bit easier for us to then fill in this equation with the people who will then get it done. And that's now where the politics where you get involved in all of this. So what needs to happen for us to get to the solutions that we're looking for? Irung'u Nyakera is with us this morning, and we're talking about the economy, looking into what needs to be done to actually, perception is reality. If you don't feel it, it probably doesn't exist. 24 to 8. We'll be back after this.
This is the Situate Your Day.
What's it going to take to implement some of these things? I mean, you kind of poured water on our hopes this morning when you said that, well, when you see a new project, likelihood is that it is feeding somebody's pocket, at least in this current dispensation, that people will bring up these new projects so that they have an opportunity to build, construct, and earn something. It has very little to do with what the nation needs economically for a target. But then there's still something that can be done. What are those blocks that need to be filled? Where should we be going?
I think in terms of what needs to be done, and this is very well-known fact, because Kenya, we don't need new papers, we don't need new research. Everything that needs to be done is there. It's just about, as you said, implementing it fast. Is crowding out of businesses, local private businesses. When the government is borrowing every single coin from the market, then the private investors and business do not get money from the banks. The banks prefer government. Government can even print money to repay them. Government will not default. And when you do that, then the private business can't even create jobs. So the government has to look at alternative ways of raising money. And it should not just be fully in the market. Then the pending bills. The pending bills are Kenyans or businesses that took loans and carried out businesses, services or delivered goods to the government. Be it that they delivered furniture to schools, delivered medicine to KEMSA or whatever, and they've not been paid, about 700 plus billion shillings. And when those people are not being paid, that's how you're seeing them being auctioned. That's why you're seeing public trusts going down in government, and of course, jobs cannot be created. So the government has to do whatever it needs to for them to repay that. I remember last time, about a few months ago, the Minister for Finance, the CS, spoke and said that the 400 billion that was owed to people from 10 million shillings and below, which brings in even youth and PWDs who've done business with government, will be paid before December. Of course, December came and December went, and the 400 billion was not paid. Actually, the only people who were paid were the road contractors through the securitization, which again was more borrowing by government, because 7 shillings from the road levy fund for the next 10 years has now been securitized into the money that was paid to them. Then thirdly, is really just cutting wastes, because the waste and theft, plunder, corruption is all budgeted for and funded. And we have to find a way to actually cut that waste. Plans have been there. If it's about the recurrent expenditure, ghost workers, all those things, it's all clear on what actually needs to be done to cut waste. Prosecuting corruption. Cases. This term, which we are going now to 5 years, we've only seen 3 people prosecuted for corruption. One is Waitito for 25 million shillings. I think we not necessarily prosecuted, but you saw the governor for Natembea being taken to courts for 4 million shillings. And yet I think we lose 2 billion shillings a day. So when you take somebody for 4 million and
it's 3B now.
It's 3 billion per day. So again, we have to be firm, and there has to, and then making debt productive. Whatever money is, because as we are saying, return on investment. Nobody has an issue with borrowing.
Borrowing,
as long as the money, you can see where the money is going. But if you can't see where the money goes, and we're just borrowing, then and the president, when he came, when he was campaigning and we were with him under Kenya Kwanza, he talked about reducing borrowing. At that time, we were borrowing about 600-700 billion. Now, local borrowing alone is 1.1 trillion. Yeah, so we've moved from 8 trillion when he came into power. Now we are 12.4 trillion. So that has added us about 4.4.
Can you see what has been done with it? Because we're looking about 2 trillion shillings.
It's paying debt.
4.
So 4 trillion shillings.
Additional.
About
if it's paying debt,
half of that budget is paying debt.
But we know
the
that
expansion in the budget.
What we're saying is, but we know that is unconstitutional, so then it is illegal.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because what we're saying here, and that's where the ODS debt question comes into play.
Yes.
Because we know that only in 2 instances can you borrow. You can borrow for development, or you can borrow in the short term to meet a budget deficit of 90 days only. Now, if you cannot find in the economy 4 trillion shillings, and I'm just saying, I'm not even talking about the 12.4 trillion. If you cannot see, because I reckon that if you put 4 trillion shillings into Kenya's economy today, you'd see it, you'd feel it. True. Maybe not in 6 months, but you would feel it. You would say this is as a result of money that was put into the economy. But like Wanjiru was saying, it's gone off to pay debts. So we have this cycle We have this cycle. So the question then becomes, if you're already on this hamster on a wheel kind of thing, where you're borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, where does this development agenda for the economy that we are talking about actually ever have a chance of playing out?
Allow me to intercept that question, because I think Irung'u has already diagnosed that problem as budgeted corruption and interest, failure to discipline yourselves in the lack of fiscal discipline vis-a-vis Vision 2030. Yeah. And I'd like to ask an adjoining question to that, because it's about new opportunities to steal. And you mentioned very interestingly McKinsey and the Big Four. Mm-hmm. McKinsey were also the contractors and advisors, I believe, on Vision 2030. At the time they put together this eminent panel who came and advised Kenya. The vision wasn't perfect, but it was a 30-year, a 30-year long-term vision to move away from short-term visions. And so, of course, lack of political interest, we moved back into big project culture. But I don't even want to talk about that. I want to talk about something that the IMF said, because the IMF has produced this report where they've done an audit of corruption in Kenya. And I haven't managed to see the report, but some of what I saw in the media is they were looking at illicit financial flows, and they were also looking at illegal tax expenditures, the exemptions that are given. And they were valuing this at around, I think, some 300 B being lost annually. They then talked about Kenya as a market access country, which struck me, that Kenya has positioned itself out there as a country that is attracting this kind of blended finance, so it seems that there is budgeted corruption, but there is also an intention by government to continue borrowing through the issuance of these kind of bonds, attracting this kind of very corporate finance. And we are seeing PPPs all across the board. So my question becomes, how is Kenya's present financing model undermining us, and where should the money come? Assume we were able to seal the loopholes. What is the cost of us going this blended finance, de-risking securitization approach, which is very complicated? And I believe many members of parliament, members of the public don't even understand this conversation, let alone county assembly. So what is this market access country? And what does it mean when you have a political economy that's steeped in corruption?
As you said, because all those different ways of raising money is probably where government is saying, okay, we have to keep raising money, but we've been told that we can't raise all of it from local. So what do we do? Let's get it from different models. But then when that money is borrowed and not used, then we are robbing the future. Because now you've even gone, like, for example, the securitization for the next 10 years. That road that was to be tolled or repaired with the 7 shillings to be collected 7 years from now, will not get the 7 shillings because that money has already been taken this year. And I think that's the biggest challenge. The IMF is even, I was looking at even in today's papers where they're saying they have not released the $750 million dollars that they were going to give to the countries because of all these questions that remain unanswered.
Plus the conditions that they've set for certain,
Exactly.
Corruption.
Yes, it's really corruption question and value for money for the Kenyans. So even when you're talking about PPPs can work. Of course, they've worked for power. For the IPPs that we have quite a number of them, and they are working. They can work for. They've worked for the expressway, which we are enjoying, and they'll certainly the Mau Summit road is also on PPP, and I believe I hope that it will work because the new administration cancelled the old tender and gave up a cheaper one for 100 billion more. Than the one that had already been put in place because they just had to. So I think it's really a question of, it's not even about how much money we are borrowing. It's about what is the money going to. And do we have enough the oversight authorities and bodies? Are they able to actually speak for Kenyans? Because as you're talking about, we've seen the Privatization Act that was passed last year, October. And the Privatization Act, one of the clauses and how it moved away from the one that was repealed or replaced by it was that any proceeds from privatization should go into the consolidated fund. Previously, the Treasury Minister was able to create special purpose vehicles for the money from privatization to go into. But as soon as that, even before the ink was dry on the Privatization Act, the Infrastructure Fund had been brought in. And the Infrastructure Fund was now to collect proceeds from privatization, which was supposed to go into the consolidated fund. And as soon as that happened, and people complained, there was public outcry on how was this created, the executive backpedaled and created a bill and took it to Parliament. And of course, Parliament was told that now this is just
stamp the rubber.
Stamp it, and proceed. And they did. And the Infrastructure Fund was there now to collect money from KPC, money from Safaricom, and others that will be coming in. But what's the problem? Problem is accountability. Is the Minister for Finance who's the one who's in charge of it, who appoints all the most of the board members. They are the ones then who decide how the money will be used. It's not necessarily fully visible to Parliament, and I'm just saying that because I'm hoping that in future we'll have a Parliament legislature that will actually be accountable to the people. So even then the Parliament can't see that. So I think there are so many of these the different structures that are being brought along to reduce accountability. Yeah, and that
in
is
every corner.
Exactly.
And I think even as we talk about accountability, it is a problem because recently the Cabinet Secretary Treasury was at the doors, at the boardrooms of IMF. And one of the things they're told is go back and look at your debt registry because it is not clean. Some of the issues that were raised includes the pending bills, that do exist, securitization, as you've stated, it is another way of borrowing, And as we talk about all these then, one asks the question, where do Mwananchi come to help address this? Or are we just at the short end of the stick, just being battered every other day? And that as well, political goodwill in handling that. Does it exist? And if it does not, how then must we, moving into 2027, change that and ask difficult questions before casting our ballot?
I think Mwananchi's role has been made very clear. It's to just pay taxes. Pay taxes, pay whatever you are told to pay and keep quiet. Yeah, that's Mwananchi's role. Every supplementary budget you've seen has had additional funding to State House. We've seen about 90 billion, as we were seeing the other day, that has been spent over 4 years. Versus the similar amount that was spent by Uhuru for 10 years. We've seen the budget for State House move from 4 billion shillings per year to now it's about 16 billion. Or thereabouts, and we expect the next supplementary will still be there for a few more billions to State House. At the same time, we're still seeing children going to school in the world classes and all of that. So I think, and that's why these, like the World Bank and the others, while of course saying we'll work with Kenya because Kenya goes beyond a single administration. So even if you borrow today, there's some other guy who will be there in 5 years or 10 years, and that guy will have to be the one to repay because the debt is not tied to a specific administration or presidency. It will still be paid regardless. And that's why you find that they will still continue to lend to us. But even for them, I think they are looking at the accountability issue. Even them, they will be held accountable. How is it that you lent?
Absolutely, and then got involved in some of these processes. Why did you continue lending?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But then I also asked the question that we seem to be flirting with the idea of actually stopping this bleed, as opposed to just dealing with it. can you have a hard stop to some of these things? I think maybe one of the presidents that Kenya has seen that actually did that was Kibaki, when he came in and he said, stop, we are not borrowing right now. With what we have, we are going to do what we can at the moment. And does Kenya actually need, I mean, all these other things notwithstanding, does Kenya actually need to borrow at the rate at which it's borrowing for a lot of these things to happen? I mean, they're not happening anyway.
Yeah.
It's borrowing to pay back loans. Do you need to borrow to send children to school? It might interest you to know that the second term of the school year begins today, tomorrow, and that there are schools who receive capitation, or in this case don't, on time, that have increased school fees by 100% in the second term. True story. Or that this SHA thing that everybody's crying about, civil servants rejecting SHA because there's not enough, and it's understandable that in order to have a social health system, you need to contribute. And I actually am behind that model. You need to pool together these resources. But then we have women who are giving birth 10 times a year, according to the system. We have people who are having open heart surgery 4 times a day. You see where the corruption that you talk about comes into play? So is it possible to have a hard stop to some of these things? It's been done before. Is that model applicable in Kenya, where we say, okay, everybody, stop. Let's regroup on some of these things?
Yeah, that model is called zero-based budgeting.
Okay.
Which is at the end of the year, when you're starting your budget process, you're asking yourself, what are all these things? Let's not budget for them based on last year's budget. Let's budget for them from zero. Yeah. So is there budget for the elderly and whatever? How many are there? Like IMF is asking, for example, who are these orphans who are being given this money? Do we have a new list? Do we know how many are still alive? How many are dead? How many are started businesses? They've
how many successful?
Have been successful, moved out of that whatever. So zero-based budgeting we've been talking about it for so long. Even when I was in planning, we were saying we are doing zero-based budgeting, but the budget goes up every year. Yeah. So if an MDA was getting 4 billion this year, their target is to get 4.5 billion next year. Yeah. It's not to account for the 4 billion that they received this year. And seeing that the bamboo project we have started in the Mau did not work, so we will not do it again, finance it again. But they're saying we got 100 million for the bamboo. Now we need 150 million for the bamboo farming in wherever. So the government has actually to push for the zero-based budget.
Is a moratorium possible on development projects?
It is, but again, as we are saying, there is no development that is happening, and those projects are not there.
So it won't help. It's not the problem.
It's not the problem, because actually we are borrowing to pay for recurrent, which actually is against the PFM Act.
Yes.
Yeah, because PFM, as she said, is supposed to only borrow for development spending, and if it's at fixed short-term deficit on recurrent. But now we are borrowing long-term for actually recurrent expenditure. So I think there's serious need for discipline, both fiscal discipline as well as the budget and prioritization discipline. And without that, then we are in for a very Kenya. We are not defaulting yet, but even the journey to default is very painful.
We also note that with all the good advice you've given us today, you lost your job.
Yes.
So the problem kind of starts there. That people who speak
people
truth.
don't like it when you say no. Don't like it when you have a different opinion, or when you have an opinion, and when you stick to what you believe in. And unfortunately, for some of us, we won't change.
I understand you also advise boards.
Yes.
And boards have that tendency of not speaking up.
They don't speak up.
Yeah.
They're afraid that I once was called and I was told, you do this, otherwise we'll disband your board. And I said, unfortunately, even if you disband the board, the next board that will come will still have a problem.
There you go. Open our eyes to certain realities this morning. We want to thank you for being here with us this morning. Irung'u Nyakera, former PS Planning. Looking at the state of the economy, it seems like there's a lot to do, but it also seems that it's really easy if you just decide to do it.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
For opening our minds to those insights. Asante Sana.
Asante.
Good morning, 8 a.m.
Life. The latest news from around the world. 94.4 Spice FM. This is the Situation Room. The only way to start your day.